ko Catalina Willie Tohi pe me he broadcasting pe me val fitu point nima FM ka ke ko te tau kamata e fini mo e whakatau ke o e fini MC Master of Ceremony
and also watching live on Broadcom and Tonga Broadcasting. I'd like to first and foremost welcome the press and also school students here for a very important press club. First and foremost, thank you to the Australian government. Thank you, Krepi Baba, and also the Australian government for funding the press club. It's an opportunity not just for us media to sharpen up our skills in asking questions, but also for the students that's gathered here. Very important that you guys are here. My name is Ramana Valab. I'll be your MC for today, but like everything that we do here in the Kingdom of Tonga, we always start with a prayer. So I'd like to ask Tapinga Lavimau to come up and grace us with a prayer.
Let us pray. Father God, we gather here today under your care and protections. We thank you for your loving and kindness that never fails us. We thank you, Thee, for those who are with us this evening, that you would guide our thoughts and actions to bring you glory. We ask you, Heavenly Father, to strengthen us and fill us with your peace. May we love and serve each other as Jesus has shown us. We ask you, Heavenly Father, to fill us with thy Holy Spirit to do your good work here on earth. We ask all this in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Right now we're going to get a welcome speech from one of our young journalists, and I'm very happy that he said yes to come and do this. From the Matang Tonga, Tupo, Waipulu.
Hello, good evening everyone. It's an honor for me to be here delivering the opening speech. Teu whe uruaki tupea whatapu, tapu ki he otua, ai au awhio i tau lolotonga. Tapu ki ene awhio, king tupa wano. Kai tuku mua pekeu, tuku atu ai ki I speech ko ni I le whapapalangi. Good evening everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here today as we are gathered here with the Commissioner for the Anti-Corruption, Mr. James Lahat. Thank you to the students as well and members of the press for being here. I want to acknowledge the fact that PACMIS in Australia is funding this program. Thank you to the CEO, Miss Mule Mangisi. Thank you for joining us as well. Koia pe malo.
Koe rea taitaria tupo Waipulu me he matangi Tonga.
I have the honor of introducing our speaker for today. So please bear with me as I go through his very experienced CV that we have in front of me. Chris Lahat, he's a seasoned ombudsman, mediator, and lawyer for over 40 years of international experience. He has a background in litigation, having worked as both as a solicitor and a barrister. His notable roles include director claim team of the Taiwan High-Speed Rail Corporation on a $18 billion US dollar public-private partnership (PPP) project, and providing consultancy for international litigation and arbitration efforts in Kazakhstan. In his role as an ombudsman for ICANN, the domain name regulator, Chris conducted mediation and other forms of dispute resolution offered, including complex cross-cultural elements. He also investigated issues and issued formal recommendation reports to address problems of fairness within the ICANN community. Chris holds a LLB from the University of Auckland, a Master's in Management Dispute Resolution from Massey University, and a grad certificate in Resolutive Justice from the Victoria University of Wellington. His professional includes being a fellow in the Mediating Institute in New Zealand, a fellow in the Charter Institute, a member of both International Ombudsman Institute and in the International Ombudsman Association. With this solid academic foundation and experience, Chris Lahat stands as an expert in a field of mediation and dispute resolution. So please put your hands together for Chris Lahat. Right now, I'm going to give it to the speaker, our guest of honor, to our Anti-Corruption Commissioner, Chris Lahat, to say a few words.
Thank you for the introduction. I expected today that I would be asked a lot of questions, but maybe I should just tell you a little bit about what we've done so far so that you know how the office is progressing. We officially started on the 1st of July. We've set up office in the old Ministry for the Environment building, and we've been getting the building renovated, spending a lot of time talking to people to get things done that are fairly ordinary, like getting blinds installed, getting our internet going, getting our computers up and running, and developing systems. And we've got a little way to go on that. And gradually, as we get everything together, we hope soon to have a fully operating office where people can come in with their issues and we can help them. So that's where we've got to so far. We're not really open for business, but if something urgent comes up, we'll talk to anybody. We want to talk to everybody in Tonga, from all of the government departments, but through to the people out on the farms and out on the islands, so that they know that there's a place where they can come if they think something hasn't gone too well. We also want people to understand we're there to help with raising awareness of integrity institutions, so that they know that there are better ways of doing things. I'm still very new to Tonga, so you'll have to excuse me if I stumble over some things. But we're here to learn, and I'm very privileged to have support from Meli Mankisi, who has been an enormous source of wisdom for me to help me prepare for the work. So I'm ready for questions, so fire them at me.
Before we come into questions, Anti-Corruption Commissioner, I would like to ask Meli Mankisi, the Executive Director of the office, to come and say a few words in Tongan before we start our questions.
Malolala ko kolebe ke hufanga he ngai whatap ko osi hono au whaki he moaklea kai ata moau ke whaiha vahe ki he office for o koeni koe aipe ke whahoko ka mautolu koe ofisi o ku teke fu mau hono kakato e unau ku ke renovate ai fale au mau fa amu ke talififia motolu ke mo me ange ke ofisi ke fai hatata noa ke mau ngahi fatongia mo service mai kakai ko fia makau he po kalama mahu inga ko ni pea ko tuku ka lala ke hoko atu ai po kalama malo apito.
This is the moment we've all been waiting for. I know it's been a while since we've been wanting to see an anti-corruption commissioner here in the Kingdom of Tonga. We finally have one, and it's the time I'll give it to the floor to you guys to have any questions. Please ask away.
My question is, what are your hopes? What is your hope to achieve in Tonga? What do you hope to achieve here in Tonga while you're here?
I hope to develop a culture which is free from some of the problems which have existed in the past, knowing that when you deal with the public service, that they are people of integrity and that they will do what they're required by their ministry without fear of any interference by way of undue influence or bribery or anything like that. And I want people to automatically assume that the public servant that they're dealing with is acting consistent with those principles.
One question, please. How do you ensure confidentiality as it's such a small country, and so how do you guarantee the confidentiality of your...
That's a great question. Our legislation, the Anti-Corruption Commissioners Act, has quite a lot to say about what we do with information that we get. The default position is that we keep it absolutely secret. The only occasion on which we can share the information is if I have to make a report to Parliament, or if there is a prosecution which results from an investigation. If there is a prosecution, then the information which I have can only be shared if the court gives a certificate saying that I may do so. And I can certainly say to the court if I don't think the information should be shared. And that's very important, because sometimes when people raise an issue as a whistleblower, the consequences for them can be very serious. But you should note that among other things in the legislation, if someone is fired because they've made a complaint, that's unlawful and can be a matter for prosecution. And I know what it's like living in a small place. I've lived in small towns myself, and it's sometimes very difficult to keep things to yourself. But I think what we have to do is respect the secrecy of the office, and if matters do come up, we will ask people to understand that no information will be shared. I should add, as well as that, we're spending quite a lot of time ensuring the best security for the information that we have, with high levels of internet security, so that you won't be able to just hack into our database and find the information. Or at least I hope not.
Koe maulao o kuia e konga he maulao ki he whapulipuli. Pe o ku o asi he kupu koia, ko e kupu maluono, o ku whiema o ke tauhi e ungahi lekoti mo e lekoti mo ngahi launga, ngahi whamooni, tauhi ke maru. Pe o ku na e osi na o ku maulotonga whengau e aki mo e kautaha i muli o taukei he cyber security ke fotu o e maungahi systems, computer mo e internet ke whapapau I e maru ai ngahi information e mau ai ofisi.
Thank you, Mr. Lahat. Desa from Gelea Radio and Newspaper. I think we're going to be talking a lot more during your tenure here in Tonga. I understand that you're still in very preliminary stage of setting up your office, but an early concern, if I may, concern or worry of yours, and this was reported by Radio New Zealand before you came to Tonga, was about our culture, some aspect of our culture, in particular gift giving, which may seem normal or appropriate in our culture, but would be considered corruption in other countries. What's your approach? I can imagine that it will be a very difficult task of trying to draw the line between our culture of gift giving and corruption. What's your approach towards that? That's my first question. I have two more. But
thank you. No, that's a great question because, of course, before I came here, the only time I had been in Tonga was about 30 years ago when I came on a holiday to Atatura Island. So I can't say that I'm at all familiar with what is the proper cultural way to deal with these. But in the meantime, I have been doing a lot of studying and looking at the way people do it, not just in Tonga, but in other places as well. So, for example, in Papua New Guinea, they have a wontok system, and last week I had the privilege of going to Darwin to talk to other anti-corruption commissioners, and we talked a great deal about many issues, but quite a lot about the difficult issue of gifting. So I am developing a protocol which is envisaged by the legislation, which will help public servants know when gifting is appropriate and when it isn't. So, for example, if someone makes you an offer of money and if it's offered in a ceremonial context, it's something that you should disclose to your team leader or your manager or your CEO. If you're in a high-risk area like procurement, you probably should decline the gift. Absolutely. There are some sorts of gifts that would be unacceptable to decline, such as a gift of food. But I think there's a well-established pattern of what is an appropriate gift of food and what goes beyond that. So if you get a tray, for example, of meat from the ceremony, that's good. But if they try and give you the whole pig, that's going over the top, and that might be excessive and something where you should, again, go to your team leader, manager, CEO, and say, look, I've been given this, and they would need to make a decision about how that's dealt with. The important thing about gifting is transparency. You have to make it known that there has been a gift if you are going to accept it. In general, you should probably not accept gifts, but with that small exception of food or something like that. Even a cup of coffee might, in the wrong context, be something you should say, no, I will pay for that myself. So we will develop a code of practice for that. It's already in the Code of Conduct for Public Servants anyway, although not expressly set out, but I hope fairly soon to have a Code of Conduct which sets it out more clearly.
Koe o koe pe e mau ngahi tau mua ke fotu ha tutu un ngawe pe kau aki moe fuaki mea ofa ka ku aspe he policy ai PSC o kai ke ngofua ke tali ha mea ofa kau ngawe fapuleanga o si ai pe moe ungahi lao taktaha upotu ngawe hange koe Revenue and Customs o aspe nau lao o ku kai ke ngofua ke tali ha mea ofa ka ku firma upe ke mau tala noa moe ngahi stakeholders ke whaiha whi mahino aki ke ngahi tutu un ngawe koni o ku iai kupu i he lao komisiona hinko e kupu valunima o ku firma o ku tutu uni ko e katoa e kaungau e komisiona o whimau ke whakaha katoa nau kaunga whapaanga mo e umea kehe. So disclose katoa e maungahi assets mo e liabilities ngahi mo ua paanga hu mai. Pea koe disclosure ko ia pau ke pulusi, pau ke tauhi halesi sita mo pulusi ke ilo e kakai.
Mr. Commissioner, my name is Katarina Tohi from Broadcom Broadcasting 87.5 FM. The Australian government, way back in 2008, after Parliament passed, with the consent of His Majesty, the law or the Act for the Anti-Corruption Commission to be established here in Tonga. So in 2008, the Australian government offered to financially support the setting up of the office. And they pledged 3 million AUD to finance the office. But it took 17 years for Tonga to actually find you. Maybe we've been hiding somewhere. So my question, in the budget allocation for 2024-2025, you have been allocated, your office, 0.8 million or 800,000 pa'anga, Tongan pa'anga. My question, is it enough? Because in your remarks, opening remarks, you mentioned something about doing the renovation of the office, and I understand you don't have a vehicle at the moment. If it's enough, fine. If it's not, is there any possibility for you to ask or to request from government? Because as far as I can remember in the past budget allocation for the past years, they have been allocated something for the establishment of the office. And probably maybe they still keep it at the Ministry of Finance. Thank you.
That's a great question. I think the problem is that when the budget was set for my office, that no one really knew what actually needed to be done. For example, I don't think the people who wrote the budget anticipated the level of security that we needed for our internet and computer systems, and we've been going to a lot of trouble to set that up. Some of the other things that we are establishing, again, just wouldn't have been anticipated. If the Australian government can give us the interest on their $3 million over the last 17 years, I'd be very grateful, but I suspect that money has gone. But if we don't have enough money to do the things that we want, we can go back to the Legislative Assembly and ask for more. We can do an Oliver Twist and say, please, sir, may I have some more? But I'm also rather hoping that I can approach some of the aid donors and I'm looking at you, Australia, if we have specific projects. So, for example, we want to set up an education program, and we'll be looking for help with that. We want to get investigators trained, and I think the New Zealand government has worked closely with the police here, and it might be that they'll be prepared to help us train those sorts of staff. So we're hopeful that if we do need more funds, and I think we will, that there will be people who can help us.
Io nai kaike amanaki lahi a ngā oe whemau ki he ofisi, ki hono renovations, mo e whotu o ngāhi systems, kauku mau lava o kole ki he whale a lea, ki a supplementary budget, for a supplementary budget, pe ko e kole tokoni ki he ngāhi tōna ni ko Australia mo Nusila.
I should add that to help with the transport options, since I don't have a car yet, I've taken the trouble of bringing my bicycle over from New Zealand.
I think that's good eating here in Tonga. My next question is, I see you have a background in mediation. Is that something that will influence your work as an anti-corruption commissioner? I'm imagining the position to be, all stick and very firm in decision making. What your mediation? Do you see your mediation background playing a role or influencing your decision making as an anti-corruption commissioner?
Absolutely, because often when people get into trouble with one sort of issue or another, you have to listen to them, and the main thing you learn as a mediator is to listen to people and help them develop the solutions. So if someone comes with a complaint about a corruption issue and I talk to the other people involved, my initial reaction would be to see if there is a solution that can be reached, rather than necessarily immediately taking them over to the courthouse and prosecuting them. There are always ways of dealing with these issues which are more appropriate than necessarily prosecution. But don't get me wrong, if I see something sufficiently serious, they'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the powers that we have, which are not small. So if you think I'm going to be a soft touch, that's not the case.
Komisiona o tauke he te whaaki mediation peoku o ne pehe e tokona lahia hene ngawe ke office ko heni ke whaiha tātara noa mo e kakai whanong ke kakai o solova ungahi papalema.
Sorry. Having a anti-corruption commissioner here in Tonga, I know there's a lot of commentary here when it comes to corruption, and some of these commentary tend to always point to the high-ranking leaders in our country. What step would the anti-corruption commissioner or the anti-corruption office? What steps do you guys go through if? First, when it comes to a complaint where you guys have to investigate a high-ranking leader here in Tonga, and second, if the result is corruption, what step to the commissioner take to prosecute or to solve the corruption if it is a high-ranking member or leader here?
The legislation doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter who you are and your rank. If you have done something which is against the provisions of the Act, then there will be an investigation and, if necessary, a prosecution.
Io, koe tau lao, koe tau mua ai lao ke whamua ai lelei whalukufua ai kakai. So paupe ke whamamau ai tokanga ai komisiona I he lahi taha e lava, e ala lava ki ngahi anga tai whaito tonu matu akiwhatu tāmaki mo mao hono whau pea kene whakaukau I ai whatungia mo ngafa o ngahi mau mawhai whapuleanga mo kau ofisa whapuleanga kehe I hono ta ofi o anga tai whaito tonu.
Sorry. Hello. Sorry. My question is, what's the process of someone coming in and making a complaint? Like, if it's just a normal person coming in to make a complaint, what's the process that you go through? Yeah. Thank you.
We're going to develop a system of complaints that makes it very easy for people to be heard. So our website will contain a complaint form. You'll be able to fill that out and send it in online. We also will have someone in our office, and you can come and talk to them and fill out a form and start the process that way. You could come in and have just a discussion and see whether the issue is something that needs to be investigated. The door will be open. Not yet, but soon.
When is soon? And also, when is the office expected to be fully functional? Yes. Expected.
I hope by the end of August we'll be in a position to start taking and processing complaints. Melly might tell me off if she thinks that's too soon.
Yes, it's too soon. Iho mau amanaki pe ke tali ha ungahi launga kauklava o ke whaiha launga I he emaili tohi pe ko ha aahi ki ofisi pe mau toki sio leva ki he launga ko ia ka koe tuutai mini ia mahoe realistically October, November o te ke mau o toi ke mau hanga tuuaki e ungahi lakanga ke ofisi ke talilelei ki moto.
We have things to do like setting up a proper case management system. And the reason we want to set up a case management system is that will enable us to keep control of the cases so that they're dealt with properly in an appropriate time and that matters are not forgotten. And that's not an easy task. I spent quite some time in Darwin talking to people who run other agencies in Australia and the Pacific, and establishing a good case management system is critical to the success of the office so that we know that the information is going to be properly looked at and considered and not just lost in the system.
Mr. Commissioner, good evening. My name is Joe Slovaka from 87.5 FM. But may I ask my question in Tongan for our listeners, and I'll translate it into English?
Yes.
After that, thank you very much. Ko te ui whilawe I ni moe ngai whunua langa hake. Hange ko ia ko Tonga, ngai whunua Afrika ko Asia, be me ot Karipiane. Be koe rea una hoanga ngawe aki I whakataha ngai pureanga. Because United Nations, I nau whare area, because General Assembly, o ui koe developing countries are corrupt prone. Ko le mama fa bido ni ke ngai fono tu poake. Pa ko foto ko ni ka ta ha ko ni ta min ko sino ko Anti-Corruption Commission. Ko lahi ono tu waki e foto e ombudsman ko kuri ta nifo. Ko ui ko na lava foka ilo. Ko office ko ni na lava foka totoro foka ilo. Ko fehu I. Ko tau ke I nga we ko ombudsman ni tau lahi. Ko ke hoko ni ko komisiona ke tau I fai hala. E ke nai ho nga we a ke ho tau ke e kuri ta ni foka ke hoko ko fukuri fekai. The question is, sir, in developing countries, it's been brought up many times at the United Nations General Assembly, the words for developing countries in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, the ACAP countries. They are being labeled as corruption prone. Very tough word for developing countries. But bringing it to your duty and your experience, you've been an ombudsman for many years. Describe here in Tonga and the world that the Ombudsman Office is like a dog with no teeth because they can't prosecute. They make recommendations. Now you are in the Office of Anti-Corruption Commission. Will you be biting like a dog in applying your job for the corruption? Thank you.
We have teeth. I should add that the UN has been very supportive of the office. I mentioned that I'd been to Darwin last week. The UN paid for everything, the airfares, the registration and everything else. And I was very grateful because budget, of course, and the fact that they're prepared to support us for that and for further matters is quite a comfort. But going back to your question, when I was an ombudsman, I went to a seminar called Sharpening Your Teeth because everybody knows that the ombudsman can only make a recommendation. And everybody hopes that a recommendation will persuade whoever has made a decision to think about it again. But if you can't get them to do so, then they have to come down to my office and we can take steps to ensure that things happen.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm Kelly Purcell. I teach at Axe Community School here in Kolamatua. My question is, when we talk about the word corruption, it carries quite a wide scope and can have carry a lot of weight. But when we talk about an anti-corruption commissioner here in Tonga, that word corruption, what is actually the scope we're talking about if people want to complain or feel there has been a corrupt act? What are we actually talking about here in terms of scope of the definition and even the scope of public servants who are perhaps being condemned or there is evidence of corruption, if that makes sense? Just the scope of the word here in Tonga.
That's a good question. What is corruption? There's actually a long list of things which is in the Act which say what corruption is. Now, there's some obvious things that you might realise, such as giving someone a bribe or getting a secret commission. But there are other things such as helping a friend get something, and no money changes hands, but they get an advantage. There's things like treating at election time, and that's buying a slab of beer for the people so that they'll come and vote for you. But there's many other things. The list there's 26 items in the list, and it goes right down to illegal drug dealings, gambling, currency violation, tax evasion, revenue evasion, bankruptcy and company violation, harbouring criminals, forgery, treason or other offences against the sovereign, homicide or violence. So there are many, many things which come under the heading. But, you know, in a country like Tonga, which has got such strong links to the church, I think a lot of the time your pastors will be able to tell you whether something is corruption or not, because they will be telling you things like, thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's goods. And sometimes you can find guidance in places you might not expect.
O koe te pile he lao, o kulis katoe ngahi mea whikau aki mo e anga tai whai totonu. Hange koe totong whafufu, kā kai haa, kā I he whili, whamole noa ia, mau I ai lao ki paanga, fufu I ai kauhia, tohine maloi, whakapō, talisone, kaukulahi e u ngahi mea o kulisi he te pile o e lao, o mau malava o whatotoro.
Question for me. I think Lala kind of touched on this question. And it's to do with investigations concerning leaders, especially in public administrations. But say an investigation is being carried out by your office, which ends up involving one of your employers. I understand you're being employed or you were appointed by the King and Privy Council. So they are your employers. Say an investigation ends up involving, just to use an example, the King has a lot of benefits, custom duties. He's exempted from custom duties. Usually goods brought in under his name are not processed in the normal process. And say you conduct an investigation and find out that there were some illicit drugs or unlawful weaponry being brought in. This is just an example. How difficult would that job be for you to investigate your own employer?
I think the king is the only person who is really exempt from investigation, and that is because when you look at the Constitution, the king reigns. He doesn't act as a public official, and the Anti-Corruption Commissioner Act says that I can investigate public officials, and that means whenever the king acts, he tells someone to do something. So he doesn't go out and do things himself. He has people who will do that for him. Those people will not be free from investigation if necessary.
Maha koe koe komisiona, he's referring ki he kupu whātaha o e konisi tūtone. Ko pehe, koe tui, koe pule o e kau no pele mo kakai ko toa pe o Tongatapu ai sino o e tui, o ku ia te ia ahono pule o e whunua, ka o ku ihene kau minista ahono whae ngau e o e whunua. So koe responsibility, koe sino ngawe, koe kau minister, mo puleanga.
Commissioner, apologies if you had covered this earlier. Offer from the Women and Children Crisis Centre. My question is, because I I know you gave a brief overview of the scope of the definition. My question is to do with sex corruption. So quid pro quo, sexual currency, is that covered in the legislation? And just tied to that, if we do have a client that comes to the centre that reports sex corruption, are we able to bring that forward to the Commission?
Yes, because that's a public official is covered by their code of conduct, and that says that that would be inappropriate. But in addition to that, abuse of position is a matter that we would look at, whether it's an abuse for reasons of sexual misconduct or for monetary misconduct. So either way, if that has happened, then send them to my office. The Act does have a section which adds matters of the same or similar nature to any listed above, and it also talks about misfeasance in public office. Misfeasance means doing something bad in your office as a public servant, and approaching someone in a way which is sexual harassment is against the sexual harassment policy which the public service has in place. So I would investigate that.
Commissioner, I have a question over here. Sorry. My question is with regards to corruptions. I think you already mentioned a lot about the definitions of corruptions, but my question is your office going to investigate and prosecute members of parliament since they have privileges as MP? And my last one is, how long can you go back in terms of investigations from your office back in the years?
MPs are covered under the legislation, so if they do something corrupt, they will be investigated. There is no limitation period on what I can investigate. There is a practical problem that evidence is forgotten, people's memories fade, and if someone were to be prosecuted, there would need to be an appropriate level of evidence to bring a prosecution. There are guidelines for what can be prosecuted, and we would need to have an appropriate level of evidence before we made that decision. And if something happened too many years ago, it's unlikely we would have good evidence to satisfy the test. But it still might happen.
Koe ofisa whapuleanga o ku kawai ha minister o Kalauni me mipa whalea lea hataha o whangawei e he whalea lea kau polisi whamau polisi hataha o ne mau halakanga whaka whamau moe kau mau tofia pea uni ihi kehe hange koe u kau poate tali ki tā moe sea ki ungahi poate public enterprises. Pea o kai ki ai ha whangatangata ki mau whatotolo i ha anga tai whaitotonu.
Hi, I'm Melita Misloi. I'm a student at Upfold College. Mr. Administrator, you stated before that you have a company policy, and I just wanted to know that what would you do if the employees don't follow those policy, and what you're doing today, what is that going to change in the Tongan society today? Thank you.
It's a great question, thank you. one of the functions of the office is education. So we want to talk to people about best practice in dealing with these matters. And we will be developing policy guidelines for people. But the public service already has some good policies in place. But we will be actively promoting those policies and any policies which we think are needed to supplement those so that people understand that there's actually some things which should change and which they shouldn't do anymore.
O koe a manaki e ofisi ke mau whae ungahi workshops mo kakai whunua, whai hatatala noa ki he ngahi hanga totonu o ku whe mau e kaungawe whapuleanga, mo ngahi whotuu tutu uni ngawe, kau osi ai pe ngahi policies ai puleanga o kulelei ko whatongia mautolu ke whai hatokoni pe whai whalelei ke ungahi policies ko ia.
I have a question. I know the Anti-Corruption Commissioner only investigates public sectors. There's a lot of situations in our country where there's work or government jobs that's been tendered out and private companies are now bidding into it, and some of the companies that win bids or won bids that might not be the suitable or the one that is qualified to do the job. Is there a channel of complaint when it comes to private companies that wins these bids and or even doing the job that doesn't fit the criteria or the standards that it needs to be done?
Procurement is an area where I expect there will be complaints from time to time. And if there are several bids for a tender and someone gets it and it doesn't look right, that's exactly the sort of thing we should be looking at.
E lava ke whatotolo I ofisi ai kau mauma whai mo kau ofisa whapuleanga. He kai lava ke whatotolo ai ni ihi whawhoituitui pe ngahi kau taha whawhoituitui tukehe ka pau o ki ai hakaunga mo taha ngau e whapuleanga.
You mentioned treating in passing. Can you please elaborate on that and maybe provide some examples, please? Thank you.
I think there have been some prosecutions, including some relatively recently, where prospective MPs have given away far too much to people they want to vote for them. Offering to build roads, for example, is an example I can think of. But it can be, as I mentioned before, something like giving away slabs of beer. Essentially, it's fine to invite people to a feast because that's the traditional way of setting up a meeting. But if then everybody gets a lot of presents for turning up, as well as sharing out the food, that's when it starts to blur into treating. So I think people know pretty well what is right in that situation. A plate of food, yes. Slab of beer, no. Getting a new road outside your church, maybe not.
I'll have a go while everyone's deciding. You just mentioned something that sparked up a question on, essentially you might be talking about gifting. On the last election, there's a three candidates that won the election, but later on was taken to court for bribery. But it was a civil court. Would it, you being here, would it turn into a criminal sort of situation? Because even though they were found guilty, but it's still a civil court, so they're able to. But I think two of them have still got a government job. But yeah, but because you are now an anti-corruption commissioner, we have one established. Would that situation become a criminal because it's next year election in November?
Until they are elected, they're not a public official. So that's why it had to go down the path that it did, that they were brought to court to have them disqualified in the civil jurisdiction. I have jurisdiction in civil matters where appropriate, but until they're actually elected, I don't have that jurisdiction. Once they're in their spot, having been elected, then certainly I could have a look at that.
So
okay, Mike.
On
Mike.
Oh, sorry. First and foremost, Mr. Commissioner, I want to apologize on behalf of our school. We come from Tabo College. We just finished work in the bush, and that's why we're late today. On behalf of our current students at Tabo College, my question's on a personal level, Mr. Commissioner. As you know, one of the biggest problems here in our kingdom is illicit use of drugs. My question to you is, what makes you different from any other foreigner who has come to our country, such as police commissioners, judges, but the problem is still here, illicit drugs. So what makes you different from any other foreigner who has come to our country? Thank you.
Again, a really good question. I don't have the power to prosecute anybody for dealing in or using drugs. However, if someone in public office facilitated that by turning a blind eye to something coming in on a ship or an aeroplane, then I would have the power to look at that. But the problem of dealing with drugs is something outside of what the corruption investigation can look at. That's a big issue, and I don't have any ideas on how you can deal with that in my role as Commissioner. If you do have some good ideas, I'd be open to listen.
My name is Liamama. The question I wanted to ask, I think, because we were late, I think you probably already answered this question. But it's, so what if there's a lot of factors that cause corruptions. What if it was a factor that was, let's say, it was not impossible to solve, but it's really, really hard to solve. I don't know if there's a word for that, but for example, money. Money in Tonga is a major factor for corruption, low wages. Sometimes, who knows, ministers may take some of the money, put it in their pocket. So let's say a minister uses money, takes some of his money, goes with it home. I report to you about the minister. We take care of that, you take care of that, you take care of the minister. But the fact that the money problem is still there, so someone else can fall into that, can do the same thing. So really my question is, how would you solve that? How would you solve that? Because it's quite impossible to stop, and because you can't really stop someone from doing it, would you go into to the financial side, or would you just stay into investigating? If anyone does it, I'll go to him.
or would you go to stop the problem before anyone preventing it from doing it again? Thank you.
It's difficult to know how to stop people being tempted by things like that. But part of the function of my office is education. So I'm glad that I've got you as students here, because now you know that there is an office where corruption issues can be investigated, and if you come across anything like that, you can report it to me. And the consequences of being caught, if a minister has taken a whole lot of money for doing something, and that is corruption, I would hope that he or she then loses their role and possibly even gets prosecuted. And I hope that would act as a deterrent to anybody else doing that. But we are human, and stopping people stealing is something that's been around for a very long time. And it is in the Bible, but people still do it.
Thank you. My name is Miakami. I'm a tutor at Tupo College. Apologies again that we came late. We were also working in the bush. But my question, and I also apologize if this has been asked before as well, but first I'd just like to make a point of the fact that you're coming into a country that is very culturally strong. We have a lot of cultural nuances that tend to be overlooked when it comes to these policies and how we implement them. And so my question really is, with this new, well, it's an old problem, but a new way that we're trying to solve it. My question is, how can we ensure that when you're implementing these policies, for communities especially that aren't aware of what these policies are, which would mean that they're also not aware of the consequences, is how do we raise awareness on these policies while also taking into consideration the cultural nuances of the communities that you're trying to reach out to? And I think a really good example is the fact that our culture is very stratified. And I'm sure a few of the questions have identified that challenge, whether it's a challenge or not, but just the fact that we're a community that is very stratified, so hierarchy is a really big issue that also leads to a lot of abuse of power, as well as challenges between the government and the church working together, which is another question that I have as well, is does your role extend into the relationship between the church and the government? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
I'll deal with the last one first. If there are issues between the church and the government, I can look at those. If it's just within the church, then I cannot. My role is limited to people within the government and people who deal with them. So, for example, private companies, I can't deal with them. I can only deal with government institutions and what they are doing. So in terms of the cultural nuances, I openly admit that I am very new to Tonga. I want to be very careful to learn and understand the appropriate way of dealing with things, and I will be very heavily reliant on Mally to correct me whenever I'm doing something which is inappropriate from a cultural perspective. So my policies will be not just things I've dreamed up, but we will be discussing those so that they are consistent with best cultural practices.
Thanks. Two-part question. Firstly, how can or will you encourage people to come forward if they have evidence of corruption, like threats, obligations, and contracts may prevent people from speaking out. So in cases where corruption has become normalised and ongoing in some sectors, what can your office do to encourage such people to speak out? And also, do you always have to have people come to your office, or are there routine investigations and observations that you will be making?
That's important for people to know, that I can start an investigation of my own motion. So if I find out that there is a culture of corruption in a department or a state enterprise, but I don't have individuals coming to make the complaint, I can still go in and I have the power to require people to answer questions. I can, if necessary, get a search warrant to go in and obtain documents. I can freeze assets if necessary. I can go to the Supreme Court and get an order freezing assets and money. I have quite a lot of power to step in. But in addition, if people are concerned about their safety and want to make a complaint, then there is provision for providing protection for them, and if necessary, if it was a very serious example, I could tell the Commissioner of Police that they need to provide a police officer to act as protection for a witness, and if necessary, to relocate them to somewhere safe. So I do have the ability to deal with matters without involving a specific person complaining, but I can also protect people who do make the complaints.
A question just on electoral bribery. There's a public consultation being carried out at the moment, and it's on some proposed amendments to the Electoral Act, and some of the amendments, in my personal interpretation, would broaden the definition or what's acceptable as electoral expenses or campaign expenses, which includes also giving the candidate being able to give a gift to a particular person, whereas the current Act does not allow that. The consultation closes in, I think, the end of this month. Would your office be interested in having an opinion or a view in that consultation? Because I can imagine that it would, if my interpretation is correct, I can imagine that it would make your job more difficult in trying to draw the line between gifting and corruption, especially when it comes to our parliamentarians, and what much worse if they're in portfolios, ministries. So yeah, I'm just wondering if your office would submit a view or an opinion on that proposed amendment.
I have the power to look at issues like that. I would have to think about whether that was something I could look at. If someone were to specifically ask me to look at it and there is a deadline, I might have to think about that.
Yeah, it's something that's definitely worth looking into, as it, in my opinion, it affects the electoral system, and yeah, thank you.
Hello, Commissioner. Tupo here from Matangi Tonga. My question is regarding corruption within your office. If it ever comes down to it, what is the process like in resolving that issue? If there is ever corruption within your own office?
Right. There is specific mention of that. If you try to bribe an investigator or an official in my office, that's a criminal offence. And there's quite a heavy penalty. So if that happened, they would be fired and then prosecuted.
And lastly, what makes your office different from any governing body, let's say the local authority here in Tonga?
We are independent of the public service. I'm not part of the public service, so I am free to investigate any matters because I don't have any connections. And I think one of the reasons why I was appointed is that I don't have any personal connections with anybody here, and that leaves me free to look at matters without fear of any offending of friends or relations.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I just wanted to follow on that comment. It's true that you are independent and you have no connections in Tonga, but that does not mean that you will start making connections while you're living here. I'm pretty sure you're not going to be living in a bubble. This is more a reflection question for everyone, and perhaps you can comment if you want. I'm just conscious that we have children in the room who are visually seeing a white man in this position. And we have the same with the Chief Justice, and we have the same with the Police Commissioner role. What sign are we sending the children of Tonga? That the people are prone to corruption and we can't have any independent, principled leaders in the country? How do we change that? Do we need to start bringing in subjects into the curriculum where children are taught about anti-corruption so that they understand ethics and principles? Because we can't go on forever and a day appointing chief justices, police commissioners and anti-corruption commissioners and whatever commissioners are coming next from outside of Tonga. Because I'm pretty sure all the commissioners that are in Australia, New Zealand, America are all citizens from those countries, and they all have connections in those countries. So we have to start thinking bigger for our children, because I'm a bit concerned and worried about the picture that we're sending our children and the message that we're sending them. Malo.
That's a very appropriate question. I should start by saying that the education side of our office is something which is very important and one that I want to give a lot of priority to. And so that education will be to teach the young people that there are different ways of doing things which I hope are better. In terms of my status as an expat Palangi, that's an interesting question. I'm confident in the fairly short period of time that I've been here that there are people here who would be fully capable of doing a lot of these jobs. And I think it would be a good idea to work towards making the need to have expats redundant. Because, you know, it's a bit cheeky of me coming in from New Zealand and telling you how to do things. But I have been appointed by the King, who made decisions about appointing a white Palangi, and I'm sure he had good reasons for that.
Ko whainga pe'en ki toi ki mahino ange, tau te whito I he whakaukau ko eni. Pe kui ai ha whakangatangata o ngahi whakatotolo ko e whai, ki ha aho moha taimi. Hange koe kwa ni iko, koe ki nau toi ngā ue nau tolu I hangai whitu, na ia hangahi keisi pe toko ki iai. Wa oi pe ka ni iko nau hike at ki mōri. Are there any expiration dates and time of any cases, or how far can you go back to investigate? Some people who have left offices, even those who have migrated to overseas countries, do you have the capacity to follow those cases? Or?
Yes. The legislation says people who are in office or have been in office, and as I said before, there's no limitation period. And if there is solid evidence, and even if it is a long time ago, we can investigate. But I want to emphasise we would need to have solid evidence. One of my concerns is that it's very easy to just have rumour and speculation. And I think particularly on social media, people are very prepared to develop conspiracy theories about matters. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. I'm interested in real evidence.
Given your role, how safe are you in Tonga, and how is your safety guaranteed?
I'm a bit worried about those dogs when I'm riding my bike.
That's serious.
I mean, that's a little bit difficult to say. I talked to two colleagues in Papua New Guinea, and because of the nature of their society and culture, when their commissioner leaves the office, he has 2 bodyguards. Tonga's not at all like that, fortunately, and I feel pretty safe. But if it came to it and I was investigating something from someone who had the ability to make and possibly carry out threats, then I would talk to the police commissioner and ask for some protection. I don't think I'll need it, though.
Mr. Commissioner, I'll start again in Tongan and I'll bring it back to English for our audience. Koe whehui o whilawe I mo mawhai koe ke hanga tu uni ke tāke a ta uwhakamatala. Peo ku iloa koe whistleblower. I tuko ia lao ka mama mai ki tua whianga ngai mo madol ka whaingo ngoi tonga ni whakau maunga we. Ka mama mai ki tua e tautea pe koe turi e ngā we. Koe ngai whunu hange koa seria monu sila. Koe na ulao ke malu i koa seria ta mini unao tonga whainga ke malu I ai whistleblower. Ta tau te whito ni ke na dole wharearea. Moi ngai whakapureanga ain koe area e o. I report from Moimoi pe koe tala noa ai ombudsman. I maure te o na report e to ta whatotoro pe he o kuai ai pot ngā ue ua o nau whainga ta ia au pito. Ke tuku mawhua matara. E kehere wakoe. Kuhiku ke tutuuni atu. Kai ka pau ke tutuuni atu pe na umama atu. O kwe ai ha whaunga ke malu i ak na tolu na aturi. Miho o pot ngā ue. Pe koe la roro tonga. The question is concerning the using of whistleblowers. Unfortunately, your task will have to tell them or compel them to give you information that you want, which is, you said, is in your power. But looking at it now, Australia and New Zealand have got them. Australia is now trying to legislate to protect the whistleblower. Before, there was no protection. In Tonga, in the latest information from the Ombudsman Office on our radio, I was hosting the program, they reported that when they investigate cases from the public service, there are 2 special, those were the words you use, ministries that are very hard to go in. I know they don't have the power that you have. And that means if we go into those ministries, you're going to use your power to compel them to give you information. They will be known as whistleblowers. Is there any proviso from your office to give those whistleblowers, if we call them now, protection in case they are sacked?
Yes, I can specifically ask the police commissioner or other officials to provide protection for people who I'm talking to. So the Act doesn't specifically talk about whistleblowers, and I must say that it's something that I might want to set out in regulations, or possibly even ask the Legislative Assembly to consider a specific amendment to the Act. But in the meantime, I think I do have the power to protect people who do want to make a complaint and are concerned about their safety.
No, it's not concerning their safety, their physical safety. Their safety in their job, to continue working while being compelled by you to give you information that they are trying to protect for some reason or other. In case they are sacked.
Yes. If someone comes to me and gives me information and they are then fired by their manager or CEO, then I would direct that be set aside, that they be re-employed.
But aren't you breaking the law?
I'm not the one breaking the law in that situation. It's the manager or CEO who fired them who's broken the law.
Hello again, Mr. Commissioner. My question is more simple. It's not about whistleblowers or anything like that. My question is about us, the youth. At this stage, we are very vulnerable to being introduced to illicit drugs and bad stuff like that. My question is, what is a way your ministry is willing to reach out to us? You know, most of us here at Tabo College, we didn't even know your ministry even existed before we got here. So what is different programs? And I invite you, Mr. Minister, please come to the bush to Tabo College and explain to us and show us your ways.
I'm open to visit. Give me an invitation, tell me when, and I'll be there.
Anti-Corruption Commissioner, just looking at your qualification, you have an expert field in arbitration and mediation. Both essentially become the third party in a term of dispute. That qualification that you have, would it help you as Anti-Corruption Commissioner, because you won't be handling disputes in any case, or would it would it help you, that qualification, in this job that you're about to do?
In those roles, I am listening to people, I am sifting evidence, I am understanding the issues. I'm trying to find out what the real issue is, rather than necessarily deal with people who might have problems with someone else. I need to identify that there is an issue of corruption and then find out if the person who has done that is responsible. And that's different, I recognise, from mediating a dispute or being an arbitrator where you are neutral. And I'm certainly not, in undertaking an investigation, I'm not going to be neutral, but I will be fair in the investigation and comply with the rules of natural justice. So my training in those areas means that I have to listen and sift the evidence and find out what has actually happened.
Mr. Hadley, my question is, just for clarification, is relevance a limitation to your investigation, of any certain cases that you will be working on? Is relevance a limitation or a barrier?
You're referring to relevance. What I would prefer to use is evidence, and whether the evidence is compelling. And in the case of a criminal case, I would need to have evidence that is beyond reasonable doubt. To start a prosecution, I don't need to have evidence of that standard, but I have to have a reasonable suspicion that there is something wrong before I can start a prosecution. But I'm more interested in whether the evidence stacks up rather than is relevant, because being relevant means that it is evidence of sufficient strength.
And depending on a case, what is an example of an evidence, or what kind of evidence would you react on?
Someone comes into the office and says that they've seen someone smuggle in a whole lot of, I don't know, fancy stereo equipment, and they don't think that they paid any customs duty on it. So I contact the person who's brought it in, and he says, yes, I did pay the customs duty and here's the receipt. Or then it gets more difficult. They might say, well, my cousin was going to pay it for me and he's got the receipt. So I then go off and talk to the cousin who has just suddenly left to go and work in Australia. So you have to unravel things step by step and find out what's happening.
Lastly, Commissioner, are anonymous reports supported by your office?
Yes, but they won't have the same weight as one that comes from a person. But an anonymous report might lead me to start an own motion investigation.
We'll take 3 more questions. 3 more questions.
Hello. Hello, Commissioner. Pacific Islands Forum comes up later this month. We'll have people from across the Pacific come here. Can you explain how the act that you work under, that gives you authority, is different from some of the other places across the Pacific, including Australia? And what do you see as the opportunities of the act that you've been given? Thanks.
I have very recently adopted 12 principles that have been developed for the Office of an Anti-Corruption Commissioner, and that has been developed by the Australian Corruption Commissioners acting collectively to develop the principles. So I'm trying to have some consistency across not just Australia but also the Pacific in the way that we work. But obviously the legislation that we use is very different in different countries. For example, in Fiji, they do have the power to investigate corruption outside of the government, and they also have specific power to undertake prosecutions, and they have an active department in their office which undertakes prosecutions. Not all countries do that. Other countries are still very much developing their offices, and they all develop their own models. But as we meet in places like Darwin, and hopefully at the end of this month, we hope to develop a common approach. So, for example, I would hope to enter into memorandums of understanding with other agencies so that we're all on the same page, effectively. And that will also guide any changes which I think are necessary to our legislation. Things are different from 17 years ago. I'm sure that there are things which we can improve to make things clearer, but it's early days yet for that.
Please, can you guys give one of applause to our Anti-Corruption Commissioner, Mr. Chris Lahat. It's now come to the time where we give our vote of thanks, and I'd like to ask Mr. George Lavaka from 87.5 FM to please make his way up here. He's heard this for the first time, that he's doing the vote of thanks, so please bear with him.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I hope you won't take this as a anti-corruption report for Lala. But thank you very much. Sir, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We learn it as journalists, we learn it as reporters, media companies, other guests in here, fellow students from all the colleges, up for all ACT, Tupou College, Queen's College, and everybody viewing us live on live stream and listening to us on radio. What an insight. And thank you for being your first guest as the Anti-Corruption Commissioner. We wish you all the best. Hope renovation goes well, and have a vehicle, and have some more money, and all the best for everything. We wish you well. Thank you very much.
Before we close our closing prayer, I'd like to thank Kerepi Baba and also PACMES and the Australian government. Without you and the Australian government, this won't be possible. It won't be possible not just for us, the media, but especially the students, to get to listen to the Anti-Corruption Commissioner. I love the invitation from Tupou College for the Anti-Corruption Commissioner to need to get a vehicle first. It's very far to go to Tupou College. And I hope these students take back knowledge that they didn't know yesterday. Now they do. So with that, I would like to ask a student from Fangaloto College to please make her way over here to give us the closing prayer.
Apa tamai afio mai ko lava e maungai tata noa ki ngai mea mau inga e maman ko en. Whawhetai ki o lau marie o tatake e prokalama e whiaf ko en. Kana tai oa e kau mai afio nā, nei kai lava e ngahi prokalama e whiaf ko en o tua. O mau whawhetai o tua o mau whatata ko eni o mau kau he lau mo lau he kau. I longai mea ko toa pena mau tā noa ki ai. O mai mua o tua Fangaloto whai totonu, ke tek mau tau, pa ki whai tāpoi kina mai ai komunishna mo le kau ngawe. Whale kesi na ngai ngawe ko toa peuk amana ke whai, mo tau mua ko toa peuk whotutu. Wone lau o ma whotutu ki mau tore tangata, ai tangata e ngai mea ku whai, ka koe awhio nao ku ne whahoko e mea ko toa pe. Amana ke mau mātuka me he whiaf ko e no tua, tu ke mau mātuk pe mai awhio na. Pea whamonu ia anu kotoa ki mau tohe whiafkoen. Ki whamonu ia, whai tāpoi kina anu kotoa. I longai mea kotoa pena i kai mau sia ki toa vaini. Ki whakakato me rungana. Ki kia whio mai pe ko mau tu i ka mau muimui at ko kakai. Kore pe ngai mea nuha whapea ko sisu karais ko i mau whamui. Amen.
Just got the notice the dinner is ready, so...
Ko e lau kakato ia o e polkalama o e whiawhini o e kalapu ko ia ki he kau whaiongongo mo ngā he kau tahaongongo ko ia o Tonga i he konferenisi e kaweinga maho inga ko ia ki ono whakawhepaki o e whaihala pe ko e anti-corruption whakatau kei ko e whiawhini ko Ramanal Valapu ko e lotu kamata ko tāpinga lawe mau rea taritari ko tupo wai bulu me matangi Tonga ko e lea pe mohono tari ko ia e ngā he whehu i o whekau aki me kaweinga ko i ni a whakatau ki. Mahono whawhepaki i o e whaihala, aia ko e komisiona ia ki he whawhepaki i o e whaihala pe ko e Anti-Corruption Commissioner ko Mr. Chris Lahate. Rea whamalo mea George Lavaka, walwhitu poine nima e whaema, pe mo e taha e kau whanawa ko e koris Queen's tēnā ne whahoko ko ia o e lotu tōku o e whiawhini. Malama fu ke whahoko e programa aonga pe mo maho inga ko ia e whiawhini. Ia no tala noa e koe ni o kaweinga maho inga koe ni ki e whonua. Mato unga ia i he tokoni mo e popo whapaanga ko ia e kautaha Pacific Media Assistance Scheme, PACMES mo e pure anga Australia. Bea mo nao whafofonga ko ia i tonga ni ko tāina kami. Lawa kakato ia e programa whamawhalanga tono na ke heo e whiawhini nei he ancient Tonga ia i popua whafunga e te ka whatongia i e tau live stream Tonga live streaming broadcasting ko whinau whatukawa te misi a ne mani tuku afu te mohenga me he reti o Tonga uluaki mo e Kou 90 FM o malu e lone o Ilaisa Helu kamo me a toa whātou.